10 times more. Two times more. Letting go and stop.
If you've ever seen me in presentation mode, you've never seen me sitting on a stage. I'm always standing, I'm always in motion, because it is the motion that moves the energy. And I had someone ask me in an interview recently, Gregg, how do you remember everything that you remember when you're on the stage? And I said, I was surprised at the question, first of all. And I said, I couldn't possibly remember everything. I have no idea. I know what the slides in a presentation will look like. I have no idea what I'm going to say. And that's why every presentation is different, because it is being present in the moment with the people, in the hearts, in the minds, in the souls in that room. And my mantra, literally, as I walk from backstage out onto a stage, my mantra to the universe is, I become empty so I can become full. In my emptiness, I'm present for whatever is needed in that moment. And that's where the magic happens. And the same thing happens with music. Same thing happens with music.
And when you move martial arts and yoga,
yes,
you could probably go to another space, or
it's always been, it's the integration of mind and body and spirit together. Martial arts, not for the purpose of necessarily of self-defense, but it's the purpose of the discipline. I've always been drawn to the discipline of yogic traditions. I've spent much of my adult life researching in some of the most remote and isolated and beautiful and magnificent and mystical places remaining on the earth today. Most of them are high elevation, high altitude. And I love high elevation. I live in high elevation. And in those cultures, every one of those cultures are things they all share. They all share, you and I have talked about this, they all have tea of some kind, and I love and collect tea. They all have music. And typically it's a wind instrument. I collect the flutes I have from, I've got a huge flute collection from every culture that I've ever been to, and they all have a form of movement. So I have adapted for my personal use. It's an amalgam of different kinds of movement. People will say, you know, what practice do you do? And it doesn't have a name per se, because it is, you know, it is an amalgam of what I've learned from the people in Tibet and the people in the Andes and native traditions in the desert Southwest. But the movement, to me, it's key to honor. And that's the word that comes to me every time that I do this, to honor the presence of the soul in the physical body and that integration. And without that movement, I think that's where the stagnation begins.
Ten times more. 2 times more. Letting go and stop.
Yeah, for me, the martial arts was my introduction to meditation. Something happened to me on my 21st birthday. I was living in northern Missouri. I woke up the morning of my 21st birthday. I remember it very clearly. And something clicked, something changed within me. And on that day, I became a distance runner. On that day, I literally went that day and registered and enrolled in my first martial arts class, and it was self-defense. It was a karate class being taught by Special Forces vet from, at that time, the Vietnam era. That was all about, it was about warfare. And on Mondays and Wednesdays, Tuesdays and Thursdays, I enrolled in another class of judo, which was all about playing. My instructor would say, "Do you want to play judo?" It's just a completely different mindset. But I remember my first day, it was Bushidokan, karate. And then my first day in the dojo, he said, "Okay, we will do a meditation on the mat before we begin." So all the students, we kneeled on the mat for about 3 minutes. And he introduced a meditative technique, and he says, "Okay, let's begin." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. Can we just stay in the meditation for a little bit longer? Because something very beautiful was happening there." And he said,
back then, that must have been very novel.
It was, and he looked at me and he said, in a little bit of a condescending way, he said, "Son, if the meditation is what you're drawn to, you're in the wrong class." But that was my first experience of meditation, and it was 1980s. I began studying yoga with a Sikh mystic in Denver, Colorado, and it was still considered at that time, in the 1980s, the Cold War era, it was considered a cult. And I remember there was a coworker who would go to the classes with me who could not tell his wife and family what it was he was doing because of the stigma that was attached to yoga during that time.
Yeah, people forget kind of what it was like back then, pre-internet, you know, where a lot of ways you hear about this as a book being passed around or going here and going there. A lot of weird fears around that kind of thing.
Brian, you think of the world that we live in now and how far we've come from the world we were in, the change that's accelerated in just a few decades. I mean, it is truly mind-boggling when you, not only the technology, again, as a musician, you know, we've gone from very thick vinyl to 8-track tapes and cassette tapes and CDs, and now we're digital, and I think from here we go quantum. I think quantum music is probably where we're going next. That's what they're working with, quantum encryption. I think the music will be the same. It's happened in a single lifetime.
Ten times more. Two times more. Letting go and stop.
I'm a degreed geologist, and I worked as a geologist during the first energy crisis of the 1970s. And when the oil industry changed, I was in Denver, Colorado, and I didn't want to leave Denver. So I applied for an aerospace position because I wanted to study, I wanted the science. I wanted to study the stars and human potential in space. And I was hired by an aerospace company. And they said, okay, you have a job. And we will give you an unclassified position for 6 months while you go through a background check for security. And then you'll have your job. So we did that. 6 months later, I got my security clearance and they said, well, this is the Cold War. We need you on the security defense side of the house. And I began working on the defense side under something called Star Wars Initiative.
Where was that? Los Angeles?
During the Cold War years. Star Wars this is where, I mean, it was an insane time.
Yeah.
It was an insane time. This was the very futuristic technology that was being deployed in space at the time. You know, lasers and mirrors, bouncing lasers off of one another and things like that. But I have to say, it was hard for me. I went through a lot of nights, sleepless nights, like why me? Why am I in this position?
Why? Because you weren't comfortable being part of this?
Because I've always had such an aversion to war, and the great wars of the past have triggered something within me, and I have a sense of what that's about, another conversation, but the idea of using the technology to take the lives of civilians on such a massive scale. And as I was working, I was a software developer for launchpad technology for missiles during the Cold War by day. And at night, I've always been drawn to the wisdom of the past. I was researching our most ancient and cherished texts and spiritual traditions, believing, as I believe today, that if we know where to look and how to look in the past, Brian, our ancestors left us the wisdom and the clues to change the way we think so that we would never find ourselves in the kind of wars that we found ourselves in the 20th century. I mean, World War II, 60 million lives. I don't even know what that number looks like. Were lost. We came so close during the Cold War era to doing the unthinkable and unleashing nuclear weapons on civilian populations. And we had arsenals that are just ridiculous, enough to microwave the planet many times over. Why would we ever allow ourselves to go to that place? And how can we avoid doing that again?